I think we're right now in a new type of renaissance. It's a new space that is really open as a way of moving out from the industrial era into a new era, which is a bit unclear. And I think it's up to us now to try to develop those stories and those potential futures that can be really serve humanity well for a long time into the future.
I have this kind of almost Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde feeling, because on the one hand, there's never been so much reason to be as nervous as today and as pessimistic as today when you look at all the scientific evidence of a world that continues, despite the Paris Agreement and despite the SDGs, to quite decisively move in the wrong direction. But the other side of this is that, that's the paradox. There's never been so much reason to be worried, but there's never been so much reason to be hopeful. I mean, since I stepped on in my interdisciplinary sustainable science career, in the late 1980s, during that whole journey, there's never been so much reason for hope. There's never been so much evidence that we actually can succeed, that the window is open.
When I'm feeling really, low and uninspired, and how are we gonna ever deal with these massive issues such as, climate change and the rise of authoritarianism. I remember, I guess, some of the stories, I can't imagine what the future looks like for anyone except for maybe myself and the community that I live in, the country that I live in. But the incredible innovation and ingenuity that has created a landscape in a place like the Pamirs over millennia, I'm convinced that human ingenuity will continue to find and create transformative pathways that are unique for that given place, and they actually just need to be given the space and power and voice to develop in their own way. And our role as scientists or practitioners is to understand that and to create and provide that space rather than necessarily impose ours.
I've just been inspired by all of these people facing such challenging circumstances who still always seem to find a way to kind of break the rules a little bit in a positive way to try to make change happen, who don't seem defeated by those, regardless of what the resource constraints or the capacity constraints are in that system. They're still inspired to keep going, and that certainly then in turn has inspired me. There is inequality everywhere. There are people without access to drinking water in every country. There is hunger, there is malnutrition, there is obesity, there is massive amounts of ecological degradation. We would not be paying attention to the signals in the system if we thought we somehow had the luxury to not engage in transformation and to think about using the ideas from resilience and complexity to understand the complexity of the change we need to undertake. So that keeps me going too.
Resilience is about thinking that the world can be fragile, and this is something that could cause you to be worried about the state of the world. But another way of thinking about this is also shows you that in a world in which things are fragile, it's also the world that we don't want can be fragile. And the impact of small events at the right time, say working with the right people, can actually cause really profound change.
And that's actually what motivates me to keep working, because it's so clear to me that we're all in this together. It's not about men against women or anything like that. We're all on this little ball of dirt floating through space together, and if we don't all work together for a better future, then there's not going to be a future for any of us. So, and I really think it's worth working for. People are amazing, and I'm constantly inspired by how dynamic and incredible people can be, and it's really clear that the more diversity, the more interesting perspectives and space you give to different ways of understanding things, the more vibrant, incredible outcomes you get. So I think that's what really motivates me to keep working, and just understanding, being a woman myself, and working with this in this area, how resilient and incredible women are.
I think working and focusing and identifying positive stories and positive things that are happening, and actually being able to bring real people into spaces in some of the new methodologies that we've been developing around futures, around T-Labs, etc. You can actually start to see some of the sparks of connection and the beginnings of a change process taking place. So with all of the negative stories and narratives and things that surround us, there are positive sparks out there, and it's really up to us to find them and to link them together. And I think that that's what really keeps us going forward, is that even if you are just having a small change, that change wouldn't have happened without your sort of bringing it together, bringing those people into a space.
So the push being feeling this need, I mean, the world we live in is not fair. Wealth is not equally distributed, and it's really not sustainable. So continuing as usual is not an option. We need big changes for people to have a good life on this planet. And I also want to emphasize that it has to do with our own welfare, and it has to do with welfare for all. What is in some ways pulling me is also that you see so much innovation happening right now. I feel like we live in this period of recognition that we actually do need to change, and we start seeing people who are really transforming the way that they are doing business. And it's everything from the small-scale farmer on the field to large-scale companies that are taking much more of a responsibility today than what they did just 10 years ago.
I think what motivates me, it's partly that we are seeing a lot of change in the world. And I think really that we're seeing the power of focusing on the positive examples and the positive, the idea that people are actually doing something to change the world. And that also comes out of a love of nature or a very strong sense of relationship and engagement.
As much as one looks into the future and thinks how the future could be different, on the one hand is inspiring. On the other, on the other hand, it's about looking back. It's about having a sense of where we've come from and how different it's been and how much has changed. And I sometimes take heart from that, because, you know, we can choose what we look at. We can choose to look at things that either haven't changed, or we can choose to look at how things have changed really, really dramatically. And I'm lucky. I live in a part of the world on the African continent that has seen dramatic change in my lifetime. And I actually find that very encouraging and inspiring. And I know for certain it's going to change dramatically going into the future. And I choose to be part of that change and the type of future that we're going into.
Yeah, I must admit that the state of the world and a lot of the trajectories and things we see happening in global environmental change and related challenges it's anxiety inducing. And sometimes you do wake up and think, I'm not sure that we can overcome the scale of these challenges. But then again, I think that my colleagues inspire me. I mean, I'm in a place where 100 or so people, and this is only a small part of a much larger group of people, are all working really, really hard to try and constantly rethink where we're going, how we do things, coming up with solutions, and really not just documenting the fall of humanity, not giving up, actually fighting really actively every single day to create something better. And so I think that that's what gives me inspiration, what allows me to every day to get energy from the people around me who are all in it because we all believe that we want to make the world a better place.
I think I'm able to stay positive because of the feedback that I get from some of the users that I've been able to engage with. I thought for a long time that I was the only one who was tired of negative news. And when I started putting out positive factual stories, the feedback actually blew my mind, and I realized that I am not alone. A lot of people are hungry to see the best of themselves and to see the uncelebrated. And so that's what keeps me going. The fact that there's not enough positive news out there and that we can celebrate who we are.
So, of course, I'm frustrated a lot of times when in my work and in life in general when it comes to making change. But I think being part of these programs where you actually gather change makers from all over the world, it actually gives me hope, and it gives me hope for that we can actually make the changes that are called for and achieve large-scale transformations. But it also inspires my research, because it's at the front lines, working with people at these, the front line is where a lot of the questions are posed that I can then use as hypothesis in my research.
Sometimes you're banging your head against the wall, you're pushing a giant stone up a hill, but then we also see the change that can happen quickly, and we do see those changes happen. We also see the fact that people are understanding now that we have to think differently, and so we're seeing a whole movement right around the world of people trying to think differently about the problems we're trying to solve. It's very inspiring to see people who are tackling these immense problems, and so that inspires me to keep working and trying to improve our understanding of practice and work with other people and spread those kind of skills and that sort of thing. So it is daunting, but it's actually really, I think it's also inspiring, and we're at a great stage in the way resilience is being adopted and picked up around the world, and I find that quite exhilarating.
I think for me the biggest issue is that I've had to realise that in terms of my own positionality, who I am, as a white man in South Africa who comes from a deeply privileged background, that I have a role, but I've got to be deeply aware of what that role is and to increasingly step back into the shadows, that I don't have somewhere to stand that is prominent. And I think that is also something that I've had to come to terms with, which continues to intrigue me, because it's pushing me into a space which I didn't initially anticipate. I anticipate to be able to direct and design, but now I'm increasingly having to be content and, in fact, know where I should be in terms of in the background.
So I think we're seeing important shifts in the relationship between science and practice and policy from when I began my career as an academic, where science was more of an ivory tower experience with very curiosity-driven or theory-driven questions. And increasingly we've seen a desire for information to flow from science to practice, but that in itself is probably not enough. What we're trying to look for more are these reconfigurations of scientists, practitioners, policymakers and other sectors of society working together to try and shape both the questions and the answers to those questions in a truly collaborative way.
So we think of this as a new renaissance, and almost like a new enlightenment era of reconnecting human affairs to the planet we're living on, and make it possible for 9 to 11 people to live here with some dignity and some peace. Thank you very much.
Okay. We'll leave it at that.